It all started with a dream, a simple, honest dream. I had worked my entire life to buy a perfect plot of land where my family could build our forever home. It was beautiful, spacious, and just outside a well-maintained neighborhood. The peace and quiet of the place felt like a blessing. Little did I know, that same neighborhood was run by a tyrannical HOA, lurking in the shadows, waiting to sink its claws into my property. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a friendly visit. A group of HOA members, dressed in business casual and fake smiles, walked up to me while I was surveying the land. Their leader, a middle-aged woman with a haircut sharp enough to cut glass, introduced herself as the HOA president. She spoke in a sugary tone, telling me how excited they were to have me in the community. The conversation was pleasant at first, until she casually mentioned the adjustments to the property lines. Confused, I asked what she meant. She pulled out a neatly folded document from her clipboard, showing me a newly drawn-up map of the neighborhood. My heart stopped. According to this map, a significant portion of my land, the very spot where I planned to build my house, was now part of the HOA's communal area. I stared at the paper, then back at her, trying to process what I was seeing. "This must be a mistake," I said, keeping my voice calm. Her smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. "Oh no, dear. The previous owner didn't maintain proper records, so we had to correct the boundaries for the sake of the community. It's all perfectly legal." Legal? That was my land. I had the original deed, the paperwork, everything. There was no way they could just decide it belonged to them. My stomach churned with anger, but I forced myself to remain composed. I told them I would have to look into it. They nodded, acting as if this was a minor inconvenience, and walked away, leaving me standing there with the revised map clutched in my hand. That night, I spent hours going over my documents. Everything was in order. The land was mine, no question about it. But the more I researched, the more I realized that fighting an HOA wasn't like fighting a regular neighbor. These people operated like a secret mafia, using loopholes and technicalities to bend the law in their favor. Still, I wasn't about to roll over. This was my land. No one was going to take it from me. The next morning, I went straight to the HOA office. I walked in, my paperwork in hand, ready to clear up the misunderstanding. The moment I stepped inside, I knew I was in enemy territory. The office was cold and sterile, decorated with generic motivational posters about community and order. A receptionist with a forced smile directed me to a small conference room where 3 board members, including the president, were already waiting. I sat down and placed my documents on the table. "There's been a mistake," I said. "This land belongs to me. Here's my original deed, surveyor reports, everything." The president barely glanced at the papers before giving me a pitying look. "Oh, I'm afraid that's outdated information. The community voted on this change months ago." I blinked. "What? I wasn't even part of this community months ago." She nodded sympathetically, as if explaining something to a child. "Yes, but the adjustments were necessary for the greater good. You'll still have plenty of space for your house. This area here," she tapped on the map, pointing at the land they had stolen, "will be turned into a lovely community park for everyone to enjoy." I could feel my blood boiling, but I refused to lose my temper. "You can't just take my land." She let out a soft laugh. "Oh, we didn't take anything. We simply reassigned it. You'll find that the neighborhood agreement allows us to make such decisions if it benefits the majority." I clenched my fists under the table. "So let me get this straight. You redrew my property lines, took a chunk of my land, and now you're telling me there's nothing I can do about it?" One of the board members, a smug-looking man with too much hair gel, chimed in. "You're free to take it up legally, of course, but I'll warn you, our legal team is very experienced. It could take years to resolve, and even then, there's no guarantee you'd win." Years. They were threatening me with bureaucracy, knowing full well that the system was slow and expensive. My heart pounded with fury, but I refused to let them see me sweat. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, studying them. They were so confident, so sure that I would give up and walk away, just like everyone else must have done. I gave them a tight smile. "I appreciate your time," I said, standing up. The president looked pleased. "We're glad to have you in the community." I walked out of that office with one thought in my mind. They had no idea who they were messing with. If they thought I was just going to sit back and accept this, they were dead wrong. That evening, I drove past the stolen portion of my land. The HOA had already started marking the area, preparing for their so-called community park. My land. They had violated my property, disrespected me, and expected me to swallow it without a fight. No, I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to teach them a lesson they would never forget. That night, I sat down and started planning. The HOA had made a fatal mistake. They assumed I would play by their rules. They thought they had all the power, but they had overlooked one crucial detail. They had claimed my land without actually securing full legal ownership. And that meant I still had control over what happened on my property. A slow grin spread across my face as the idea formed in my mind. If they wanted my land, they were going to pay for it in the most ridiculous, painful way possible. I was going to build a wall, a massive, towering, unavoidable wall that would block every inch of their precious park. And when they came running, demanding that I take it down, I would hit them with a deal they wouldn't see coming. The HOA thought they had won. They had no idea the game had just begun. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in a long time. The HOA had played their hand, and now it was my turn. They thought they could walk all over me, take what was mine, and expect me to sit back and accept it. They had no idea that they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to make sure they regretted ever crossing me. I spent the entire day making calls, gathering resources, and consulting with experts. The first thing I needed was a solid blueprint. I wasn't going to build just any wall. This had to be something that would make a statement, a wall so massive, so ridiculous, that it would leave the HOA in complete and utter shock. It had to be tall enough to completely block off their so-called community park, thick enough to be unbreakable, and built with every legal loophole in mind so that they wouldn't have a single way to take it down. Once I had the design finalized, I started looking for contractors. At first, most of them hesitated when they heard what I was planning. A 20-foot-high wall around a park? Some of them laughed, thinking I was joking. But when I showed them the paperwork proving it was my land and promised a generous payment, they were more than happy to get the job done. Within a week, I had a full construction team ready to go. The day construction began, I could already feel the tension in the air. As soon as the workers arrived and started unloading materials, curious neighbors peeked out of their windows. Some even walked by, whispering to each other. It didn't take long for the HOA to catch wind of what was happening. Less than an hour after the first concrete blocks were being set, I saw a familiar figure storming down the street. The HOA president, her usual fake smile replaced by a look of pure outrage, marched straight toward me. Behind her, a small group of HOA board members followed, looking just as furious. "What on earth do you think you're doing?" she demanded, her voice shrill with anger. I turned to face her, completely calm. "Building a wall," I said simply. She scoffed, throwing her hands up. "You can't do this. You can't just build a wall in the middle of the neighborhood." I raised an eyebrow. "Actually, I can. This is my property, remember? The same land you claimed as yours for your park." Her face turned red. "That land was reassigned for community use." I shrugged. "Reassigned, but not legally transferred. You never actually took ownership of it. And since it's still my property, I can build whatever I want on it." The HOA board members exchanged nervous glances, realizing the flaw in their plan. They had bullied and tricked people for so long that they had gotten sloppy. They had expected me to roll over and accept their decision without looking into the fine details. "You're being completely unreasonable," she hissed. "Think about the children, the families who were looking forward to using this park." I smiled. "I am thinking about them. That's why I'm making sure no one trespasses on my land." Her hands clenched into fists. "This is a violation of HOA regulations. We have rules about maintaining the aesthetics of the neighborhood." I crossed my arms. "Oh, I know all about your rules. And I also know that private property owners have the right to build fences and barriers as long as they meet local zoning laws. And guess what? My wall meets all the requirements." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. She turned to one of the board members. "We have to stop this." One of them, a balding man in a cheap suit, adjusted his tie awkwardly. "He's technically right. The land is still legally his. We can file complaints, but he's within his rights to build." Her face twisted in rage, but she knew she couldn't win this argument, not yet at least. She shot me one last glare before spinning on her heel and storming off with her little entourage trailing behind her. The moment they were gone, I turned back to my workers. "All right, let's keep going." For the next few days, construction continued without interruption, but the HOA was far from giving up. They started sending me letters, first politely asking me to reconsider, then threatening me with fines and penalties. I ignored every single one of them. They even tried to file complaints with the city, But since my wall met all regulations, they had no legal grounds to stop me. Then they resorted to more desperate tactics. One morning, I woke up to find a group of HOA members standing near the construction site, trying to convince the workers to leave. They claimed the project was illegal, that I wasn't paying them properly, and that continuing the work could get them into trouble. Fortunately, I had already warned my crew about possible HOA interference, so they ignored the lies and kept working. By the end of the second week, the wall was nearly complete. It was a magnificent sight, 20 feet high, stretching across the entire length of my stolen property. The HOA's beloved community park was now completely enclosed, trapped behind an impenetrable fortress. The moment the last brick was set, I installed the finishing touch, a massive metal gate with a bold sign hanging right in the center, private property entry fee required. That evening, I stood outside, watching as residents gathered in front of the wall, whispering in shock. Some of them tried to peek over, only to realize how impossibly high it was. Parents who had planned to bring their children to the park were left standing outside, staring in disbelief. The HOA had promised them a public space, but now it was nothing more than a walled-off prison. The HOA president showed up within minutes, her face twisted in fury. "You have gone too far," she screamed, her voice echoing through the street. I turned to her, completely calm. "Have I? You took my land. I just made sure you couldn't use it." She gestured wildly at the gate. "You can't charge people to enter." I shrugged. "Why not? It's my property. If the HOA wants access to it, they can rent it from me." The board members looked horrified. One of them stammered, You can't be serious." I smiled. "I'm completely serious. I'll even give you a discount for being such wonderful neighbors." For the first time, the HOA was completely speechless. They had spent so much time bullying people into submission that they had never considered what would happen if someone fought back. And now they were trapped, literally and figuratively. As I walked away, I could still hear the HOA president sputtering in rage behind me, but there was nothing she could do. The wall was up, the gate was locked, and from now on, if they wanted to use the park they had stolen, they would have to pay rent to the very man they had tried to cheat. And this was just the beginning. The morning after the wall was completed, I woke up to the sound of shouting outside. Peeking through my window, I wasn't surprised to see a small crowd gathered near the entrance of the park. HOA board members stood at the gate, angrily rattling the metal bars, while confused residents looked on, demanding answers. Parents who had promised their kids a fun day in the park were now realizing that their beloved community space had been locked away behind an impenetrable wall. The sight filled me with satisfaction. I stepped outside, taking my time as I walked toward the gate. The HOA president was already red-faced with fury, arguing with a few frustrated homeowners who were beginning to turn against her. When she spotted me, she pointed an accusing finger in my direction. "There he is, the man who has single-handedly ruined this community." I stopped a few feet away, crossing my arms. "Ruined? I haven't ruined anything. I've simply reclaimed what was mine." She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "You're being ridiculous. You can't just build a wall and charge people to enter a park." I smirked. "Why not? It's my property, remember? You reassigned it, but you never legally transferred ownership. That means I can do whatever I want with it. And right now, that means charging an entry fee." One of the residents, a father holding his young daughter's hand, frowned and turned to the HOA president. "Wait, is this true? You told us this park was for the whole community." She stiffened, her eyes darting around as more neighbors began to murmur amongst themselves. She wasn't used to being questioned, and I could see her struggling to come up with an excuse. "It was supposed to be," she said hastily, "but he's being impossible. He's exploiting a technicality." I chuckled. "A technicality? You mean the fact that this land was never yours to begin with? That's not a technicality. That's called ownership." The murmurs grew louder. People were beginning to realize that they had been misled. Some of them looked angry, not at me, but at the HOA. They had trusted the board to make fair decisions, but now they were seeing the truth. The HOA had overstepped, and now the entire neighborhood was paying for it. One of the board members, the balding man who had tried to intimidate me before, cleared his throat and stepped forward. "Look, let's be reasonable. We can negotiate. Maybe we can work something out." I raised an eyebrow. "Negotiate? Now you want to negotiate? You weren't interested in that when you took my land without permission." He shifted uncomfortably. "That was a misunderstanding." I laughed. "A misunderstanding? You gaslit me, told me I had no choice, and tried to bully me into accepting it. But now that the tables have turned, you want to talk? That's cute. The HOA president's patience finally snapped. Enough of this nonsense, she shrieked. You're going to take this wall down immediately, or we will take legal action. I tilted my head. Legal action? Go ahead. I'd love to see you try. But let me remind you, I've already checked the laws. My wall is completely legal. My gate is completely legal. And my right to charge an entry fee? Also legal. So if you want to waste HOA funds on a pointless lawsuit, be my guest. She was fuming. This is extortion. No, I said calmly. This is business. You want access, you pay rent. Simple as that. The board members huddled together, whispering in frantic tones. I could see the desperation in their eyes. They had lost complete control of the situation, and they knew it. Finally, the balding man spoke up again. How much? He asked, his voice tight with reluctance. A slow smile spread across my face. Oh, I'll be generous. A modest monthly fee should do. Let's say triple the amount you originally paid for the land reassignment paperwork. The HOA president's jaw dropped. That's outrageous. I shrugged. Take it or leave it. For a moment, she looked like she was about to explode. Then she glanced back at the growing crowd of residents, some of whom were starting to demand answers from her directly. She had lost their support. If she refused my deal, she would be the one blamed for this disaster. Her eyes darted back to me, filled with hatred. Fine, she spat through clenched teeth. We'll pay your ridiculous fee. But this isn't over. I smirked. Oh, I know. You're going to try and find a way to weasel out of this. Maybe find some loophole to get the wall taken down. But good luck with that. She didn't respond. Instead, she turned on her heel and stormed off, her board members scrambling to follow her. The crowd slowly dispersed, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others glaring at the HOA board for getting them into this mess in the first place. As the days passed, the HOA begrudgingly began making their monthly payments. It must have burned them to write those checks, knowing they were paying rent for land they had once thought was theirs. But they had no choice. They had dug their own grave, and now they had to lie in it. Of course, they didn't stop trying to fight me. They sent inspectors to look for violations, but everything was up to code. They tried to pressure my contractors into retracting their work, but all of them had been paid in full. They even attempted to spread rumors about me, painting me as a greedy villain ruining the neighborhood. But the residents weren't buying it. They had seen the truth with their own eyes. What made it even funnier was that some of the non-HOA residents in the area actually found my situation amusing. A few of them even paid the entry fee just for the fun of using the now private park. It wasn't about the park itself. It was about making a statement. People loved seeing the HOA lose. By the end of the month, cracks had begun to form in the HOA's foundation. The president was under immense pressure, board members were resigning, and homeowners were demanding changes. I could see it all unraveling, piece by piece. One evening, as I sat on my porch sipping a drink, I saw a moving truck pull up in front of the HOA president's house. A few hours later, she stepped outside, looking defeated. She wasn't moving out just yet, but she was packing some things. I smirked, realizing what was happening. The pressure had finally gotten to her. She was losing control, and soon she wouldn't be able to keep her grip on the HOA any longer. As she glanced in my direction, our eyes met for a brief moment. She looked at me with pure hatred, but beneath it, I could see something else. Defeat. She had fought and lost, and no matter what she did now, she knew she couldn't change the outcome. I lifted my glass in a mock toast, smirking. She turned away and disappeared into her house, slamming the door behind her. The war wasn't over just yet, but the battle? That was a victory I would savor. The weeks that followed were some of the most satisfying of my life. Every month, like clockwork, the HOA had to send me a check for the land they had once tried to steal. I imagined the frustration on their faces every time they signed those payments. It must have burned them up inside to know they had walked straight into their own trap. But as much as they hated it, they had no choice. They had created this mess, and now they were stuck paying for it. The neighborhood, however, was a different story. The HOA's reputation was in shambles. Homeowners who had once blindly followed their rules were now questioning everything. Whispers spread about the way they had mishandled the entire situation. People weren't just upset about the park being locked away. They were angry that the board had lied to them. They had promised a public space, a place for families to enjoy, but instead, they had created a financial disaster that they were now paying for out of pocket. The resentment grew with each passing day. It wasn't long before residents started calling for change. Some demanded a restructuring of the HOA board. Others wanted to abolish the HOA entirely. Meetings became chaotic, with heated arguments and shouting matches breaking out regularly. The president, once so smug and confident, now looked drained every time she appeared in public. She had lost her grip on the community, and she knew it. One day, I received an unexpected visitor. It was one of the remaining HOA board members, a man who had mostly stayed quiet during the whole fiasco. He arrived at my doorstep looking nervous, shifting uncomfortably as he explained why he was there. The HOA was in financial trouble. Between the rent they were paying me and the legal fees they had racked up trying to fight me, they were bleeding money. Homeowners were furious, many refusing to pay their HOA dues in protest. If things didn't change soon, the entire HOA would collapse. I listened patiently, nodding as he explained their predicament. Then he finally got to the point. They wanted to renegotiate, lower the rent, maybe work out a deal that would allow them to keep the park open for residents without charging them an entry fee. I pretended to think about it, tapping my chin thoughtfully, dragging out the silence just long enough to make him squirm. Then I shook my head. No deal. His face fell. Come on, you can't be serious. The HOA is falling apart. You've already won. What more do you want? I leaned against my doorframe, smirking. Oh, I don't want anything. I already have everything I need. You signed the contract. You agreed to the rent. That's not my problem. He looked desperate. But the homeowners are finally seeing the truth. I cut in. They know what kind of people have been running this place. They know how you've abused your power. You can't put that genie back in the bottle. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. So that's it. You're just going to keep this going forever. I smiled. Unless, of course, you want to make me an offer. His eyes lit up with hope. An offer? What kind of offer? I stepped closer, lowering my voice just enough to make him lean in. Sell me the HOA. His mouth fell open. What? You heard me, I said. I'll buy out the HOA. You're already on the verge of collapse. Cut your losses, hand over control, and walk away while you still can. He blinked, completely stunned. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. You and the rest of the board are drowning. This is your only way out. You know it, and I know it. He stared at me for a long moment, then swallowed hard. I have to talk to the others. Go ahead, I said, stepping back inside. Take your time. But the longer you wait, the worse it's going to get. It took less than a week. The board caved under the pressure. Faced with mounting debt, community outrage, and the looming threat of total collapse, they accepted my offer. The HOA, once the unchallenged rulers of the neighborhood, was now officially under my control. The first thing I did was call for a community meeting. Homeowners arrived confused and wary, expecting another round of empty promises. I stood in front of them and did what no HOA board had ever done before. I gave them a choice. The HOA as you knew it is gone, I announced. I own it now, and I don't plan to run it like those who came before me. So here's the deal. We can either dissolve it entirely and go back to a normal neighborhood, or I can run it the way it should have been run in the first place, with fair rules, reasonable fees, and no power-hungry board members making life miserable for everyone. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Some people still wanted the HOA gone completely, but others saw the potential of a new system, one that actually worked in their favor. In the end, we took a vote. The majority chose to keep the HOA, but with massive reforms. I slashed unnecessary fees, eliminated ridiculous fines, and made it clear that the HOA was there to serve the community, not control it. The response was immediate. People were relieved. The tension that had hung over the neighborhood for so long finally began to lift. As for the former HOA president, she didn't last much longer. The humiliation of losing control was too much for her to bear. She quietly put her house on the market and disappeared, leaving behind nothing but bitter memories and a ruined reputation. With my new control over the HOA funds, I decided to have a little fun. I used some of the money to upgrade my house, adding a massive patio, a state-of-the-art security system, and a driveway extension, just to spite the people who once tried to control every inch of my property. But the best part? I had the park restored, removing my private entry fee and officially designating it as a free public space. I made sure the entire neighborhood knew that they had their park back, not because of the HOA, but because of me. The irony was delicious. The very land the HOA had stolen from me was now mine in every sense of the word. I had turned their own system against them, and in the end, I walked away with everything. One afternoon, As I was enjoying a cold drink on my newly built patio, an older neighbor who had lived in the community long before the HOA takeover walked up to me with a knowing smile. "You did it," he said. "You beat them at their own game." I grinned, raising my glass. Next time, they should read the fine print. And with that, the HOA saga came to an end, not with another power struggle, but with a victory so absolute that no one dared to challenge it again. The neighborhood thrived under the new leadership, free from the tyranny that had once plagued it. And me? I enjoyed every moment of it, knowing that I had done what no one else had ever dared to do. I had won completely and utterly. The dust had settled, and the neighborhood was finally at peace. The HOA was no longer the oppressive force it once was, and for the first time in years, people actually felt comfortable in their own homes. The ridiculous fines had been eliminated, the pointless rules thrown out, and most importantly, the community was no longer being ruled by power-hungry board members who treated homeowners like peasants. The shift was noticeable in every way. People started talking to their neighbors again, no longer afraid of being reported for minor infractions. The constant tension that had once gripped the entire area was gone. I had expected some resistance from the old HOA loyalists, the people who had benefited from the ridiculous control and fines, but they had faded into the background. Some had moved away, unwilling to live in a place where they no longer had the power to dictate how others lived. A few even tried to form their own private groups, attempting to enforce community standards on their own, but without the HOA backing them up, their influence was nothing more than empty words. No one listened to them anymore. There was, however, one final piece of unfinished business that I hadn't forgotten about. The HOA may have been under my control, but I had spent too much time dealing with its aftermath to focus on something just as important: the former president. The woman who had orchestrated the theft of my land. The one who had tried to gaslight and manipulate me into submission. The one who had been so convinced of her own power that she never even considered what would happen if someone stood up to her. She had slithered into the shadows, trying to stay under the radar, but I wasn't about to let her walk away without facing the consequences. I did some digging. It turned out that after resigning from the HOA, she had been struggling financially. Without the position of power to back her up, she had lost the influence she once had. People who used to fear her now ignored her, treating her like just another resident. Even worse for her, she had spent years funneling HOA money into pet projects, expecting it to always be there. When the financial disaster hit, she had been forced to cover some of the losses personally to avoid legal trouble. The stress had gotten to her, and it showed. She had aged 10 years in just a few months, her once polished appearance now replaced with exhaustion and defeat. One afternoon, I spotted her sitting alone at a small cafe just outside the neighborhood. She was staring blankly at her coffee, lost in thought. It was the perfect opportunity. I walked over and took a seat across from her without waiting for an invitation. She blinked in surprise, clearly not expecting to see me. "You," she muttered, her voice flat. "Me?" I replied with a grin. She sighed, rubbing her temples. "What do you want? Haven't you humiliated me enough?" I leaned back, studying her. "I don't think humiliation is the right word. You did that to yourself. I just gave you a reality check." Her eyes flashed with anger, but she was too tired to fight. "I lost everything," she muttered. "The HOA, the influence, the connections. People won't even look at me anymore." I raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like karma to me." She glared at me, but there was no real bite behind it. "You don't understand. I was trying to keep things in order. People need rules. Without structure, communities fall apart." I chuckled. "No, people need fairness. They don't need a dictator micromanaging their lives and stealing their property." She scoffed. "You think you're better? You bought the HOA. You're in charge now." I nodded. "Yeah, but the difference is I'm not using it to control people. I gave them the power to decide how they want to live. And guess what? The neighborhood is doing just fine without all your ridiculous rules." She let out a bitter laugh. "So what? You came here just to rub it in my face." I smirked. "No, I came here to give you an opportunity." That caught her attention. She narrowed her eyes. "What kind of opportunity?" I pulled out a piece of paper from my pocket and slid it across the table. She hesitated before picking it up, her eyes scanning the words. As she read, her expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. "You want to hire me?" she asked, looking at me like I had lost my mind. I nodded. "You spent years managing an HOA. Even if you did it terribly, you know how these systems work better than anyone. Under the right leadership, you could actually be useful." She looked down at the paper again. "A property management role? Not just any role. I said. A second chance. A chance to actually do something good for once. She stared at me, trying to figure out if I was messing with her. I wasn't. She let out a long breath. Why would you offer me this? After everything, I shrugged. Because I believe in redemption. You were a nightmare as an HOA president, but I don't think you're beyond saving. You just need to learn how to work with people instead of controlling them. She was quiet for a long time. Then finally, she reached for a pen. I don't know why I'm doing this, she muttered as she signed the document. I grinned. Because deep down, you know I'm right. As I stood up to leave, I saw something in her eyes that I hadn't seen before. Humility. For the first time, she wasn't acting like she was above everyone else. She had been knocked down so hard that she had finally started to see the world from the other side. I walked away knowing that, one way or another, the HOA war was officially over. The former tyrant had been dethroned, the neighborhood had been freed, and for the first time in a long time, things were looking up. A few weeks later, I saw her at a community meeting. She wasn't sitting in the front row, barking orders like she used to. Instead, she was listening, taking notes, actually paying attention to what people wanted. It was a strange sight, but it confirmed what I had suspected. She was learning. Maybe, just maybe, she could change. As for me, I enjoyed the victory. The HOA had gone from being a nightmare to a functioning, fair system under my leadership. The land they had stolen was legally mine, and I had turned it into something better than they ever could have. I had taken everything they threw at me, flipped it on its head, and walked away on top. The neighborhood was better off, the power-hungry board was gone, and the community was thriving. I had beaten the HOA at their own game, and in the end, they had no choice but to play by my rules. I had won completely, and it felt damn good.